Hi everyone. This evening I am playing a Philadelphia 1777 from Worthington Games. I've had this game a little while since it came out a few years ago now. Haven't played it in a little while. Sat there on the shelf, so I thought I'll give it a playthrough. I've probably played it about, I don't know, half a dozen times or something like that. It is, as you can see, it's a block game. Normally, if you're playing two players, the back of the blocks would be facing your opponent. You can play it solo, as I am doing this evening, but obviously you kind of miss the sort of the block mechanic, the fog of war mechanic, if you will. It is a point-to-point game, so there's no hexes or anything like that. Here we've got we're going to call them the Americans for the sake of this evening's game, already set up. We have key American leaders in key locations. So, for example, if I just move around the camera, we have Washington here, for example, and leaders in Philadelphia, Concord, and then Wilmington. There are also militia units spread throughout the board, and each of the leaders has a corresponding. You can't quite see them all; they're just off camera in these sections here. So, for example, it means you don't have to have all the blocks with the leader. If you want, you can have them off board. And so, for example, Washington's units are here with regular infantry and with cannon. Exactly the same for and we're going to call them the British forces, again, for ease for tonight's game. They're already set up in location. They are Britain and allies, of course. And again, 4 leaders, and their forces are represented in each of these. You can, when you're playing 2-player, you could have them turned upside down so the opponents can't see. Adds to the fog of war as well. But as I said, the game solo's pretty well, I think, if you're used to playing war games two-handed. And I am a massive enthusiast of the American War of Independence, so I really enjoy the theme of these games. This is a game in a series. I have all the games in this series from Worthington. They don't take too long to play. It is 20 turns, but I often find I never really get to the 20th turn, as it were. 1 or 2 occasions. And normally I do play these types of games, 2 players with my older children, and again solo. Pretty much, as most of you know, probably I can generally enjoy playing all war games solo. There's very few that I have found unsolable, as it were. In terms of the setup, you are pre-described where you have to put the leaders, but the militia you can place where you like. And I have tried to put them in defensive positions, as it were, the other side of a river. So it's much harder for the British to fight over the river, for example. And then I think what we'll do, as the Americans will mop up some of these militia units. Generally speaking, how you would play the game, you really want to focus your forces to a leader, because the leader can move multiple blocks with them as they move around the board. And the number of blocks depends on the leader. So, for example, Washington can move can move 2 spaces, if you would, 2 points, and he can carry 9 blocks in total, including his own. Whereas, say, for example, let's pick a British. Here we have Grant. He can only carry 5, but can also move 2. Some leaders can only move 1. For example, Howe can only move 1 point, as it were. And then you have a number of action points you can spend. There's some you rolled depending on the modifier as to how many action points you get, and you use those action points to move around the board. And when you finish moving, if you move into another area, then a battle ensues. You have a handy sort of separate map for the battle. It is a typical 3 sort of 4 areas really: the centre, the left, the right, and the reserve. And you roll dice, and you need to get generally 6s. What is interesting is the British, if they roll a 1 for the most part. It can cause the American militia to flee, and if one of those zones is emptied, then the whole section, the whole battle as it were, is over. And of course you can also elect to retreat, which is often how I play it solo. If I feel one side's taking a bit of a knocking, then that side will retreat. It's a very in terms of complexity, this game is very low, and like I said, it's a couple of hours. I've got the rule book. Don't normally refer to the rule book, but I haven't played this particular game in the series probably, I don't know, I haven't played it this year certainly. I did play it last year, so. But like I said, I'm a big enthusiast of this historical period, so I enjoy playing these games very much. As much for the fact that it's generally quite low complexity and you can play it comfortably in an evening, but also the theme is very appealing to me. In terms of the victory, the British, for example, will win if they can take Philadelphia over there and hold it for a couple of turns, something like that. Or they can defeat Washington, and Washington is eliminated in the battle. And both sides can gain victory, which is normally, to be honest with you, how I find the game plays out, when both sides' strength points are reduced so much. And obviously with a block game, you rotate the block every time it takes a casualty. So for example, this block here has 2 strength points, whereas some of the British down here have 4, for example. Some of the American infantry also have 4 as well. So normally, the British certainly, the sort of tactic I'm using tonight is the American very much on the defensive, and somewhat evading, and the British trying to move as quickly as they can up to Philadelphia, to see if they can take it. And we obviously have the key river here. In terms of locations, they're all pretty standard, but there are a couple of defensive locations. So there's a fort, a couple of forts, for example. So yeah, what I'll do is I'll play a turn or two, and then sort of describe what's happened and talk about the game as I do so. So I've just done the first turn, well, first sort of turn and a half, and I thought I'd just stop and just talk a little bit about some of the tactics that I'm employing in this game this evening. The British are making advances, trying to get across this river here without a major battle across the river. So we've moved Howe up to here, to New Garden, and we've moved Cornwallis up to Wilmington. Now the Americans, they were able to get more action points on both the die rolls at the beginning, so they always moved first, or they decided to move first, and the weather has always been clear. So the Americans are sort of preempted where they think the British will try and cross, and either try and slow them down or move an army into position to be able to defend that river. Now, rightly or wrongly, and this is one of the great parts about playing these games solo, is you can try different tactics quite quickly. In order to protect this river here, Green has moved up to here to try and halt Howe in this location, and Washington with his army, and I've given Washington a sizable force when I set the game up, and it is up to the player how many units you give each particular leader. I've moved Washington across here to be able to protect Philadelphia from this location here. If Grant over here is able to make good on this part of New Jersey. So what I would do normally next, or what I will be doing next, is now I've moved some of these leaders into position, there will now be a battle. And we have, in this particular turn, on turn 2, we have 2 battles to resolve, this battle here and this battle here. I would imagine in both occasions the British will be able to make good on their plans, but we'll let the dice decide and see how that is resolved. So we're now Just coming towards the combat section of turn 3 for the British. Now in the previous turn, the British were able to make good on their attacks, predominantly because in both cases the number of defenders wasn't enough, so they sort of fled the battle straight away and took a casualty as a result. So what we have here now is we have Grant here in New Jersey, and Washington with his quite considerable force has moved up to this location here. Washington's pretty much at, in terms of his number of units, is at a maximum, actually slightly over. Here we have Howe moving and trying to make good here against Greene across this river here, and we'll do a battle resolution to see what happens here. Howe has a sizable army, Greene a lot less so, but it does have some militia, and of course he's defending across the water. And then Cornwallis here, whose force is smaller than Howe's, is trying to make it across the Brandywine and find a location, preferably without a conflict. Certainly without a conflict of his choosing. So what we'll do now, we'll resolve this battle here and this battle here. Now, I mean, that's already decided, because under the rules, if there are so few defenders, you don't do a battle resolution. They have to defend and take a strength point casualty. The reason that I moved this leader here for the British was to make sure they had a port for the supply. There was a danger that as Grant moved up through New Jersey, the wily Americans could have closed the door on the supply line, which would have been very unfavourable to the British in that location as they move up through New Jersey. So it has cost the British a bit of time, I would say. The other thing that I have done here that's making me sort of question whether I chose the right tactic, certainly for the Americans, is that I've kept one of the leaders, the American leader here in Philadelphia. I can't help think that I'm not sure, 100% sure, that was the right thing to have done, or not really. I sort of feel having another American leader to be able to defend across the Brandywine would have been a good idea. But I did also feel that in doing so, it sort of left Philadelphia undefended without a leader. I could have start moving the leader. I could have put Washington in Philadelphia. Actually, no. The rules actually state where you have to put the leaders. So I could not have done that. But I could have had Washington probably moved him up to Philadelphia to leave some troops, or maybe even leave some troops here and move out. But chose not to do that. I'm not sure that was the right thing to do. Time will tell in this game. Certainly, when I finish the game, I often write some notes on a bit of paper and put it in the box, and I shall make a note of maybe getting the leader out of Philadelphia as an open question mark is a good idea or not. So we'll do this battle resolution and do the next turn and see how things are going. Now we're halfway through turn number 4. I've just stopped. In turn 3, after the last video clip I made, Howe was able to defeat Greene quite significantly, even though the British were fighting over the river, and they certainly did take some casualties from the defensive fire from Greene. When it was their turn to attack or to fire, just the sheer number of units was able to make the American force turn and flee. And when they fled, unfortunately, they suffered more casualties. And when you leave the battle, when you flee the battle, you roll for every enemy infantry, and on a 6 they inflict a step loss, or strength point loss, I should say, probably. So Howe has been able to make good on this side of the map here. So Howe is now across the Brandywine. In addition, here, Cornwallis has made good an attack onto Birmingham across the Brandywine. Now this was simply down to a very unlucky dice roll for the Americans. Who goes first in the turn depends on the number of action points, and the British got a very good die roll and the Americans very poor. so the British were able to take advantage of that. I think if the Americans had the better die roll, I think it could have been different. I think the Americans may have been able to stall the British moving across the Brandywine, but that's not to be today. So basically, Cornwallis this unit here will flee, and Stirling here is in a bit of a tight spot because he has 3 enemy commanders here. Now, in the American turn, we'll resolve these 2 battles here, and then it'll be the American turn. And my inclination is for the Americans to see these British moving up through here towards their objective of Philadelphia. We have Washington here on the side, and this is where I'm of 2 minds. I'm of a mind for Washington to attack Grant here at Salem, and Washington's force is much stronger than Grant's. Now, even if you were playing as 2-player, you'd have some inclination because Washington can have 9 units and Grant can only have 5. And of course, even with the units turned upside down, you'd still be able to get some sense of the number, maybe not the strength, but the number. So I still think it's in keeping for Washington to be able to determine that he has stronger force than Grant. Maybe in the narrative I'm playing out in my mind, maybe he's sent out recon skirmishers to inspect the forces at Salem and got some sense that maybe Grant's force is a little weaker than his own. So the mind I'm in is to let Washington to attack Grant here at Salem, and then, assuming that's successful, Grant would have to retreat across the river here and across the Delaware, and of course that could open up the door for Washington to move in behind the British, and then the British would have to contend with a sizable force from Washington, sort of attacking like that. Or what we could also do for Washington is to move Washington back through New Jersey to the forts here, and defending a fort will be a lot easier for Washington. So it's that, does Washington attack, or should Washington defend? And I'm of equal 2 minds. I think what we'll do is we'll see what happens here. I'm very conscious as the Americans that Howe should defeat Greene again at the White Horse, and Greene's going to have to keep moving back through to Charleston here, which is leaving the door wide open for Howe. Cornwallis will certainly defeat here at Birmingham, so then you have 2 very sizable forces with Cornwallis and Howe moving kind of not being harried by anything. But we do have Stirling here, with Stirling's force is not sizable, unfortunately, for the Americans. So it all hinges really on Washington, and I feel this is going to be quite a pivotal turn, a pivotal decision. Does Washington go in the attack, or does he go in the defence? It's sort of, I feel partly that in Washington's character, he would equally seize an opportunity and defeat the British here at Salem. But also I could see the sense that maybe he feels he should return and defend Philadelphia. And these are good defensive positions here, 2 forts, make the British very hard. And maybe if he returns and defends and lets the British actually come closer to Philadelphia, and then uses his sizable force to harass the British then at the last, as it were. So it's quite a tricky one to decide, kind of torn. But certainly what we'll do is we'll resolve these 2 battles here, and then in the American turn, I'm also tempted, which is most unlike me, most tempted to flip a coin, which sounds very flippant with a leader such as Washington to decide what he should do. It certainly will make for an interesting narrative for the game, which is why I'm playing this game solo. Anyway, get on and get this battle sorted out. So at the end of that turn, Howe was able to soundly defeat Green, and unfortunately for Green's army, they took a severe mauling in the process. How I think one unit took one strength point of loss. However, Green took multiple losses, so retreated to Charleston. Fortunately for Green, the British weren't quite on top of the job and was able to retreat in good form and good order without being harassed, and so made good on the retreat. We now have Cornwallis here at Birmingham. We have some militia that have retreated back to here, and Stirling is moving back to Chester. In the end, I decided, for good or for bad, that Washington and his forces would retreat back up to the fort there. Now, fortunately for the Americans, in the next turn, the Americans have more action points than the British, which means that they can decide what they want to do and can probably do all the things that they would wish to do. The key things, I think, for the American side is to really get across this river here and stop the British from moving their forces to the very top of the map, so they could move and attack from into Germantown and Philadelphia, and maybe harass the other British as they come up. Now, the interesting question for myself as the Americans is, should Green's forces have taken a sound thrashing, really, to be honest, are in poor form at the moment. So Green needs to be able to move up and maybe collect a couple of these militia units here. Washington has a very strong army, and we could move Washington up into Philadelphia and just take the last stand approach and defend Philadelphia against probably what would be the vast majority of the British armies. Or we could let Washington, basically I'm trying to think of, can I move Washington in time and Stirling and almost swap places with them? So Stirling defend against New Jersey. It's going to take a little while for Grant to move up. I mean, he's got two, depends on the weather, of course. If the weather's poor, you can only move one, point, as it were. So lots to think about for the Americans. Americans definitely on the back foot. The British have had some losses, but nothing really. So their armies are pretty much in good form as they were at the start of the game. So the Americans are definitely having to fight a withdrawal. And I can see the reality for the Americans of basically that last stand in and around the Philadelphia area. The Americans have not been able to harass the British enough, and certainly in terms of the number of turns, the British are making good progress for the most part. Making good progress. Yeah, lots to think about for the Americans. Interestingly, I did look at some notes when I played this game before, and I think every time I've played it, the British have won. So certainly I can already see, even at this point of the game, quarter of the way through, it's definitely a tougher job for the American, I think, than for the British. Which is quite interesting. So I'm hoping what I can get from this is to make some further notes on how this battle played out, some further thoughts as to a better tactic for the Americans, to see if we could improve their chances the next time. It's not all over yet, of course, but my instincts are Green's army's just taken such a battering that his army's going to be pretty much out, really. He can probably only really defend or really stand any chance combined with another leader. But we'll see. Lots more to play yet. So now, Howe has attacked across the water, or will do. I'm about to do the resolution of the battle, but we'll attack across the river here at Green here in Pottsgrove, and then Cornwallis here will make short work of these units here, because there's so few of them. They'll instantly retreat and take a casualty. And then over here, British forces, or under British command, we should say, moving up and Washington has been able to switch places somewhat with Stirling. So Stirling's now at Fort Mifflin, I think it's pronounced, and then the British here, Grant hasn't been able to move up simply because the British have not had enough action points to be able to do so. So we've got the Americans in good defensive positions on this side of Philadelphia. And in fairness, Washington can probably react as depending on the weather, but has a movement of 2 points. And so if needs to, can always get back to Philadelphia if required. And then the British forces are making good progress here. And at some point, there will be a battle here between Grant and Stirling. Depends on who, if Stirling can get into this fort here quick enough or not. We'll see. So yes, quite an interesting sort of narrative that's playing out. We're not even halfway through the battle yet in terms of turns, but as I predicted, I would expect to finish the game before the end of the 20th turn, but we'll see. So before we resolve the battles in this particular turn, I think this turn is going to be one of the most pivotal turns in the game so far. So just to recap where we are, this door is pretty much open, but Hal's movement is only 1. The weather's good, doesn't really affect the movement of 1, but it's going to take Hal quite a while to move into Philadelphia. By that point, Green here should be able to reinforce Philadelphia comfortably. Cornwallis in the centre here is going to make very short work of this just 1 unit of militia. So again, the door will be open for Cornwallis. Here, however, Washington is defending across the river from these attacking forces here. So Washington has probably got the slight upper hand simply because of that fact. And here we have Stirling, who's in the fort here, defending against a Grant. Now, both those two forces are sort of equal size, but obviously the fort will give Stirling the advantage. And in fairness, even if defeated, Stirling could then move back to this fort here. So, depending on what happened, now the risk to the American forces is that with Cornwallis, especially with a movement of 2, Cornwallis could close the door on Washington being able to get into Philadelphia. Although Washington, depending on what happens to this fort, Washington could move to this fort here and then into Philadelphia. So it's quite interesting from a narrative point of view as to how important this turn is. So we'll resolve those battles and then we'll see where we are. Yes, indeed, quite a pivotal series of battles and somewhat strategic from the American perspective. So obviously Cornwallis, no problem, as you expected. I mean, there's no dice roll involved. Was able to defeat soundly the small amount of militia here. Washington had quite a poor initial part of the battle. The first turn wasn't really to Washington's favour, even though he was defending the river. So Washington chose to retreat to here, mostly because it then would still enable Washington to move to Philadelphia. I think Washington thought he could have stayed in the battle and to see how that would be resolved, but I felt that the best option for Washington at this point would be to move to that position. There was a risk that Cornwallis could have closed the door, partly also because Stirling lost the fort here. Just incredible good luck for the British die rolls. Incredibly bad luck for Stirling. This is where this demonstrates the importance of the sequence in the battles. Choosing which battles in what order was quite an important part of this game, of this turn. Sorry, because if Stirling had not have lost the fort, Washington may have stayed in the battle a bit longer. But there's a risk to the Americans that the British forces could end up attacking Philadelphia from all the different areas. Not that actually makes any difference in the game mechanics, but narratively, I felt that was important. So next turn in fact we'll actually see who has the upper hand in terms of the action points. Now the action points are quite straightforward die roll. It's 1d6 per, so the British would get 6, and oh dear, the Americans got a 1. So that would give the British 4 action points, and the Americans only give them 0. So it'll give them 2 against the 6. So and the British can go first. So what we'll find now is that we'll probably move. In fact, let's do it now. Howe can move up to Worcester there, for example, and we'll move Cornwallis probably to attack Washington, and these 2 forces to attack the fort here, and then we will resolve that. So as you can now see, all the American leaders have retreated to Philadelphia, and it's the British have the AP advantage. They will move Howe up to White Marsh, but Cornwallis and these leaders here these 3 will attack. To be honest with you, I think even without Howe, in fact, actually, what the British would do, they'd probably just sit there and wait. The Americans are not going to can't get any more reinforcements, so we might as well attack with all the 4 British leaders. In fairness, I don't think they particularly need Howe. Looking at the forces, the British have massive upper hand. Now, of course, Philadelphia is fighting across a river, so for the first turn, all the British units will be rolling 1 die less. However, I don't think that will make too much of a difference. The key battles, just every dice roll went in the British favour. Nothing went in favour of the Americans. In fact, in some of the battles, the Americans didn't cause any casualties on the British at all, whilst taking significant losses themselves. The one plus for the Americans was they were able to perform a very good retreat and took no casualties as a result of retreating. But looking at the units on the table in this area here, which you can't see, I apologise, it's just the camera. The British outnumber the Americans comfortably, 2-1, maybe even 3-1 in the strength points. In terms of the game mechanics, what I will do is I'll do a couple of battle rounds, and whichever force loses goes down to 20 strength points. We'll call the game there. I comfortably predict it will go in favour of the British forces. The American forces are above 20 at the minute, but only just. So the British hardly have to cause any casualties, and then the Americans will surrender Philadelphia, and the British would have taken their prize. But let's see what the dice roll. You never know. So no great surprise, as I predicted, the resounding victory for the British forces. Valiantly defended by the Americans, but the British were able to take Philadelphia, 1777. Things I've learned from this game play session, I would say I should maybe have got all the American leaders into play rather than holding one back. I think maybe looking back, Washington should have had a crack at taking Salem. It'd been quite interesting, certainly from a gameplay experience point of view and from a narrative point of view. But a very enjoyable evening playing this block war game. As you can tell, I am very fond of this historical period, the American War of Independence, and I've got lots of games in my collection, lots of books on it as well. So yeah, very much enjoyed that, and sort of really got into the narrative, what was taking part. I think probably the last thing I would say is that every single dice roll, nearly every single time, went in the British favour, not in the Americans. If sometimes I'm playing a game solo, occasionally I'll re-roll the die roll for the sort of losing side just to see narratively what will happen. The next time I play this, I'll make some notes, pop them in the box. Definitely going to get the more of the American leaders involved, or just that other 4th leader involved. I'm not sure that was the smartest thing to have done. It's always going to be inevitable, I think, that the Americans are just going to get pushed towards Philadelphia, and they need to make something quite game changing, as it were, early game or mid game. This didn't take very long to play. I didn't get to anywhere near to 20 turns. I think I got to about 10. I sort of lost track of the turn count, if I'm being honest. But a very enjoyable gaming session this evening. I hope that was interesting. If you've got this game, and would love to hear your thoughts as to some tactics, etc., things that I can learn from, as always. And yeah, thanks for watching as ever. Thank you.